Okay, welcome back, everyone. So it is my pleasure. So both I and Flavie will be co-chairing this panel discussion that is entitled Future of Neuro-AI Through the Lens of Early Career Researchers. And so this is, I think, a panel that we were very excited about organizing over the last couple of weeks. The goal that we hope this to have is to actually initiate a conversation here and to hear from the panel, discuss questions related to the future of the field. By the field, I mean the interaction and the intersection between neuroscience and AI. But in particular, we wanted to hear from early researchers or early career researchers. We often hear from the experts in the field that have been in the field for a long time, where they think the field is going. But we thought this might be really interesting to actually ask the people who will be actually building that future. So those who are at the very early stage now, and that will be part of those who will be shaping what the future of neuroscience and AI and interaction between the two might be. But in doing that, obviously, there are exciting things to think about in terms of what might come out of this future or where are we heading, but also important questions about challenges, either that lie ahead or honestly challenges that we have right now and that we need to deal with. Some of them are scientific, others are societal. And we, as you know, always at Maine, we'd like to also to address these questions from multiple perspectives. So enough talk. What we'll do is we'll invite each one of our panelists here to give a very short presentation about their research work and their interests. Going to be 2-3 minutes introductions by each one of them, so to get an idea of the research they do. And then we will start a conversation. Flavie and I will be asking them a few questions to kick off the conversation. But please, from the very beginning, start thinking about the questions that you would like to ask. These can be questions, but they can also be comments from your side about how you also, from your side, see the future of neuro-AI. So with that, I'd like to call Mohamed Abdelhack to come on stage. So Mohamed Abdelhack is going to say very briefly a few words about him. So he's currently a postdoctoral fellow. His main research domains are neuroinformatics and healthcare AI. One interesting about Mohamed that he's one of the founders or the founder of Arabs in Neuroscience, whose objective is to elevate the voice of Arab neuroscientists and increase the exposure of neuroscience education in the Arabic-speaking world. I also asked him about favorite books or music, and he said one of his favorite books is the one called Crime, My Beloved Country by Alan Paton. So please join me in welcoming Mohamed to the stage.
Oh, thanks, Karim, for the invitation and for the kind introduction. Hi, everyone. So I work on just so many topics. I just like, to explore ideas that just come out and they're interesting. But if I'm going to be finding a unifying topic, that would be the idea of robustness. So the idea would be how is the human brain more robust than the AI systems, and how does it generate this kind of robustness? And then the second question, going to the AI, how can we make AI system actually more robust? And that's how I got into the idea of healthcare AI, because that data is just crazy noisy. And then the other part about it, which would be where psychology comes in, what causes the brain to lose its robustness. So things that are for example, mental disorders, neurological disorders. So I started with this idea of how do we actually see blurred images or degraded images in general. So you probably would not know this place, but this is where I studied in Kyoto University. This is the landmark, but you can at least, see that there's sort of a tree, there's a wall, and there's probably some building that is happening, even though this image is very blurred. And what we were trying to do at the time was we actually looked at the fMRI activity, and we showed those blurred images, and then we transformed the fMRI activity into the DNN feature space. So DNNs are only feed forward. And then we started looking at what those DNN features that are decoded from the brain are similar to. Are they similar to the same image being shown, or are they similar to the ones that are coming from an original image? And what we found at the time was that there is a tendency for a neural sharpening of the image that is shown in that is decoded from the human brain. So this study was published in Neuro, like that's like in 2018. Yeah, and then I started working on the models, but yeah, that's still work in progress. And we also started looking at schizophrenia patients in order to look at like if this is perturbed in those in the subject space. Then that's when I moved to healthcare AI, and then I started to look at the idea of like missing data in healthcare, which is like a rampant problem. So I started implementing something that is like it's inspired from biology. So the idea of modulating the weights using like the missing data flags and their relationship with the data. So if you think of it like it's like attention models, but like something that is more biologically inspired. And it did seem to be helping even when you introduce more missingness in the data progressively. And that's now the work that I'm currently working on, which is I'm working on now large data sets of UK biobank, and I'm looking at the task fMRI data of vision and also resting state and also cortical thickness. And I'm looking what is shared between something that is like sleep quality or insomnia, so sleep features, and also things like how does it interact with mental health and cognition. So yeah, this is currently being written, and yeah, hopefully we'll find the preprint will be available soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Mohamed. So our next panelist is Isil Bilgin. She holds a bachelor in pure mathematics, a master's in computer science and game development, and a master's in neuroscience of language, and a PhD in cybernetics. Her main research topic is development of brain-augmented natural language processing models. She's been involved in a number of initiatives that focus on open science and open source communities. As to the question for the books, you mentioned one of her favorites is 1984 by George Orwell. Favorite music is probably rock band, partly because she grew up in a family where a dad was in a rock band. And I asked her about dream profession as a kid, and she said cryptographer. So please welcome Isil Bilgin.
Thank you. So I should just indicate that it's a privilege and honor to be among all these brilliant brains and amazing researchers. So and this is literally my almost third month in the AI field. That's why please be gentle with your questions. And yes, I had a mathematics modeling and machine learning background, but I'm actually having AI as my main research field. That actually is funny that I'm that new in the community that something funny happened yesterday, that I was helping our attendees with their codes yesterday. Shahab was there. So someone just tried to tip me. I don't know if he's here. So $5, really? This is not how it's here. So anyways, and also I put the money back on your code. So yeah, okay. So anyway, this is how new I am. So let's go. So yes, I am Isil Bilgin. I am a postdoctoral researcher at the Neuromod project under the supervision of Professor Lavoie-Cardinal from the Carnegie Mellon University and Professor Abdelhack from the University of Montreal. And as Karim mentioned, I hold a PhD in cybernetics, but my main focus of research was investigation of dynamic functional and electrophysiological networks of brain while we are intervening all subjects with new contents via some naturalistic narratives. And coming from this language modeling and machine learning background, so we thought that natural language processing would be a very interesting feature to move on. And so, oops, I have some animations apparently. And my current project focuses on development of some fine-tuning large language models to understand how and encode brain activity while it's presented to naturalistic stimuli. So for some of those who might not be familiar with what naturalistic stimuli means, it's differing from the, those experimental setups, like rather than comparing whether this is a dog versus cat and more stimulated type of experimental setup. So naturalistic stimuli actually refers to those more stimuli with more high level features and more multimodal features, as for example, watching a movie or reading a novel or listening to a podcast, to create or mimic our day-to-day world around us, and understand that those complex relationships between those different multimodalities. And we know that contextual embeddings performs better in predictive performance of the models. So what we are aiming to focus that how we can increase the specificity of contextual embeddings to improve the model performances, but also, I'm sure many of you are aware of this amazing paper came by from DeepMind, that if we can leverage enough data, because they showed us actually we don't need that big language models, we don't need that much data to train and have better predictive performances from the language models we use. So, and just to tell that I'm so lucky to be in that project, because we have an amazingly big volume of data set that we collected, my colleagues collected up to 150 hours of multimodal imaging data from 6 participants over the last passing 2 years. And we have 2 more years to collect data to make it up to 350 hours of neuroimaging data from many multimodal tasks, and as you can see, gaming, visual processing, auditory processing, and so the way we are heading as a lab at the moment with all those different groups and projects that we are aiming to bring and combine all these of course, the traditional transformer networks, and also these high dimensional features from this multimodal data, to see if this mixed approach could be implemented into brain augmented training in robots and continual learning. So this is so my project will be the language leg of this project, and I'm super excited to work with these brilliant minds and this huge amount of data that Courtois Foundation was so generous to help us with going through this adventure. So, and lastly, I want to just mention that I have been over the past years before the academia as well, I spent good amount of time with engaging with open source communities. I was a researcher at the National Electronics and Cryptology Institute of Turkey, and I worked in development and distribution of the Linux-based operating system in military governmental bodies, and I worked in the cryptology of some aspect of this project. So, and I had a privilege to engage with quite a lot of open source communities back in the time. So, and also the privacy and security concerns when it comes to the data privacy, of course. And I have been happily involved, and it became my child, like a Brain Hack global community last 4 years, and I had a chance to meet many of you actually from there online. Now I know actually you are human beings. Exist, not an emoji or a digital persona. And I have been again so privileged to work with Konrad Kodin in the establishment of Neuromatch Academy, Neuromatch School, conferences, involved with Brain Hack, organization of human brain mapping in many aspects. And recently, I'm so happy to, and I would definitely all of you to go and check, had a mentorship and also the community participation in Open Life Sciences, which is a program run by UK's Turing Institute, which aims to develop the features open science leaders. It doesn't matter which field you come from, but they want you to learn and develop your projects definitely based on having the ethics and applications of the open science in your day-to-day research. So hopefully I will try to give more background and interference from these aspects that I have been heavily involved, and meet me next year, I will be better, more expert in AI, hopefully too. Thank you all, and let's have a good discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Isil. So, okay. And so our next panelist is Tyler Bonnen from Stanford University. So Tyler is a PhD student in the psychology department and with the Woodside Neurosciences Institute. His main research area is vision. He's been involved in a number of initiatives. One of them is called Men and Masculinities Project, which aims to, it's an effort to end gender-based violence by engaging men in conversations about gender and sexuality. He's also been involved in an initiative called the Belong Initiative, creating inclusive neuroscience communities for people of color. The question about the book, he said, one of the recent ones he's most interested in was the 5th season, and also the whole Broken Earth trilogy. And to the question, this was a funny one, the question when I asked about the dream profession he had as a kid, his answer was dinosaur. So maybe he'll tell us more about that later. So please join me in welcoming Tyler to the stage.
I could never tell if I wanted to be an herbivore or a carnivore. That was like my real conflict as a 5-year-old. You all have a really incredible community, and it's been a joy being with you for the past couple of days. I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to talk about one basic idea that runs through a lot of the work that I do. And the idea is around kind of how we have complementary learning systems in the mammalian brain and some of the behaviors that these learning systems support. Also, I'm embarrassingly still on Twitter, so you can find me there. Also, feel free to email me as well. So in general, we might, within the mammalian brain, think of sensory cortex as providing a basis space of visual features that are useful to support many downstream behaviors. The ventral visual stream is a really good example of this kind of basis space. And deep learning models have provided really powerful tools for understanding what's going on in this neural system. However, not all tasks are linearly separable in this basis space. That is to say, not all tasks are easily supported from reading out of canonical sensory cortex. We are nonetheless able to, on a single shot case, given new experiments, given new environments, able to rapidly outperform a linear readout of those sensory encodings. We do not currently, well, that's a fascinating conversion. We do not currently have good models from the deep learning world to support these kinds, to help us understand these kinds of systems. And so my work uses 3D object perception in an attempt to characterize the complementary learning systems that support primate behaviors. I might ask you, for example, whether or not two objects are the same or different. These are the kind of stimuli you can discriminate between within the blink of an eye. Your behavior is both accurate and fast. These are also the kind of tasks that are supported by both a linear readout of the ventral visual stream and contemporary deep learning tools, even though, of course, you've never seen these kind of stimuli before, unless you've seen me give some version of this talk before. These are the kind of stimuli that take a little bit longer in order for you to evaluate. Specifically, one of the reasons why is because in order to collect high acuity information, you effectively have, high acuity information in the primate is restricted to a relatively small field of view. And in order to get high acuity information about this entire object, what we have to do as primates is effectively move our eyes around this object. We then take this sequence of visual information and we transform it into the kind of object-centric representation that's useful to support the kind of discrimination on this task. That is to say, we take a two-dimensional retinotopic input and we convert it into three-dimensional coordinate system. And this enables us to say, in this case, these two images are not of the same object, right? These are different. Just to kind of show you a little bit of data to back that up, I'm just going to cartoon it, basically, but you can look at some recent work that we put out that talks about how we use electrophysiological data, lesion data, and psychophysics data in order to make these kinds of claims. What we find is that at rapid timescales, there's a real striking correspondence between human behavior and a linear readout of the ventral visual stream, as well as these deep learning tools, like, for example, convents. However, humans are able to rapidly outperform. These animations are fascinating. Sorry for the conversion, everybody. I usually use Keynote. These humans are able to rapidly outperform a linear readout of the ventral visual stream with two things. First, we require a little bit of time in order to sequentially sample from the stimulus, as I just outlined. We also require this very specific neuroanatomical substrate, periorbital cortex, which is downstream from the ventral visual stream within the medial temporal lobe. And so effectively, the work that I do is taking these neural data, that is, we know a little bit about the structure that supports these tasks. We know a little bit about the inputs that are sent to this structure, as well as the behaviors that the structure supports. And then we can then take those neuroscientific data and try to understand the function of this neural system within a task optimization framework using contemporary optimization approaches from computer science. So very much looking forward to this. Looking forward to talking to us today.
Thanks, Tyler. So there you go. And so our next panelist is Chris Emezue, who's at the Technical University of Munich in Germany and also involved in Lanfrica. He's doing a master's in mathematics and machine learning. His research topic is on natural language processing and causality. He has been a strong advocate for inclusion of underrepresented languages and communities in language technologies, including, I think, African languages, and we'll hear more about that. Favorite music, he says classical music, and his dream as a kid was to become an inventor. So please join me in welcoming Chris Emezue.
Thank you, Karim. Thank you very much, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here, coming all the way from Europe. It's really glad to be here. So I will start with a new perspective, talking about languages and communities. I grew up in Nigeria, in the western part of Africa. And growing up, we have so many languages in Nigeria. It's about 400 languages in a very small country of 140 million. So you could walk just a few kilometers and you could meet different people speaking completely different languages. It's like really different, not mutually intelligible. And somehow we all kind of live together and we all communicate and we all understand one another. So I grew up to learn that languages are a beautiful thing. They're a way into someone's culture, into people's culture, into understanding humanity. But unfortunately, I wasn't trained to learn my own language because in the community, if you want to be successful, you need to speak English. So that's how I grew up learning English. And I've had the unique advantage to travel to different countries. So I got a scholarship to Kazan, Russia, where I had to learn mathematics in a different language, in the Russian language. And we had just 8 months to learn the Russian language, and then we just put into a room, and that's how we started learning mathematics. So it was really interesting understanding the language, understanding the culture, and then fast forward to master's, bam, I'm in Germany, trying to learn German and doing, okay, this time is in English, so that's much better. What I'm trying to say is that growing up and through my experience, I've gone to understand the meaning, the importance of cultures and the importance of languages and how languages are a way to really interact with people's culture. And so from mathematics, I was wondering what I could do with mathematics, learning this theoretical with laws and theorems. I didn't want to be a high school teacher. I felt I could do much more than just teaching it. So I wanted something that you could also see the practical use cases of the applications of mathematics. And when I got to know about deep learning through Francois Chollet's Deep Learning with Keras book, I was pretty excited at how you could use numbers and algebra and optimization and probability to really create a system that can do wonderful things like recognizing numbers. And so I started on my own with my high school, with my university roommate, trying to learn and have practical experience with this thing called deep learning. And while I was learning that, I was wondering what I could do with it. So I dabbled a bit with reinforcement learning. It was super exciting. I used reinforcement learning to train an African game. Then I did a bit of computer vision, so tried to do some object recognition. And then I came into natural language processing. And this was really exciting for me because for the first time, it was really a way to make machines understand us humans. And I think that's a very, very important part of anything we are doing in AI. If you're doing anything that has to do with AI, you need the machines to understand humans. And we humans communicate through language. So you need machines to understand languages. And so this is how my work in natural language processing started. This is how I came into natural language processing. So why is it important? Artificial intelligence right now is transforming our lives significantly. We have really wonderful models, and big models keep getting bigger and bigger. We have wonderful like text to image generation, translation, and voice assistants. You can practically talk and do wonderful things with voice assistants now. Like Whisper came out and it's super amazing. We have ChatGPT, which took the world by storm. So these are really wonderful things coming up. So why do we still have to do more? Because it turns out that even though these things are wonderful, there's still a lot of languages that are still excluded. There's still a lot of languages that are left out. And while it's easy to say, well, we could just do English and the few popular languages, my experience has shown me that even the unpopular languages are equally important because you need these AI systems to be truly robust and generalizable. They need to be able to understand even the languages of the few. And so it's interesting that in the world, we have 7,000 languages and counting. Some of them are extinct, some of them have different levels of number of speakers, but all in all, it's about 7,000. But we're very, very, like where we are right now is we have a long way to go. And so when you come to the world of African languages, so bringing you all to the continent called Africa a bit, it represents 30% of the world languages. So that's about 2,000 plus languages. And just to give a perspective in people, that's about 1.4 billion people. And it turns out that as great as these NLP systems and language technologies are, they don't represent many of these languages, which means they don't represent many of the cultures. So here are just some examples with the image text and the whole thing. And so this is why like what I'm doing matters, because it's about trying to provide or enable or facilitate language technologies for what we call underrepresented communities. They are underrepresented because their languages are not popularly spoken or used, but they are also important because they represent a way to the people, to the cultures. And if you want to build a language technology and you really want to benefit the whole of humanity, the system needs to understand as many of the languages as possible. So this has inspired most of my work around natural language processing. So I do a lot of work on what we call Africa NLP. So that's NLP for low resource languages. Some of the problems facing these languages, the most loudly spoken one is data. Oh, we don't have enough data for them. That's why we call them low resource, because they don't have a lot of resources. If you go to the web and you scrape all the data from the internet, a large majority of them is in English, and then you have some European languages. But then the African languages are like 0.1%. And if you talk of the indigenous languages, that's like 0.001%. So data is a very big bottleneck facing these technologies. And so most of my work has focused around trying to enable these language technologies to work for these languages, even though they don't have enough data. So that's transfer learning has been there. Building data sets in a smart way. So instead of just, if you want to build a data set for an indigenous or underrepresented languages, you can go to the web and scrape everything. But we've seen that the web is not representative of these languages. So you would get like some Chinese characters and they would tell you that's Swahili. And so we're now looking at how to really engage with the communities, because it turns out that if you really want these technologies or whatever AI you're building to really benefit a people, you need to engage with those people. You can't just sit down in your office and imagine this wonderful thing and start building it. You have to talk with these people, understand what they really need. Maybe what they need is not some AI that will be translated for them. Maybe they need something else. And so we've done a lot of effort at Masakane and Lanfrica to really reach out to communities, provide a platform where the AI intellectuals, non-AI people, different backgrounds can come and talk and really find out what to build for these communities. And then recently, I've been very interested with causality that started last year, because I realized that the current paradigm of just more data, and scaling could not really work for these languages. There's some languages like Hokkien that We saw the other day with the unwritten languages. So some languages are unwritten. Some languages don't even have a text format. And so even the ones with text format can never really have so much data in the next 50 years. So just relying on more data to solve the problems of AI is not enough for me. And so I entered causality because I see it as a way to really understand machine learning models better without really relying so much on the data. If you could understand the data generating process of these models, if you can understand the latent factors and how they interact with one another, just maybe it might help me to improve NLP and language technologies, especially for the underrepresented communities. And yeah, so that's it about me, and I'm very happy to be here and to talk with you.
Thank you, Chris. And our fifth panelist today is Laura Suarez. She's a PhD student in the IPN, the Integrated Program in Neuroscience at McGill University. Her main research topic is Neuro-AI, with a focus being more on neuroscience. And to the question, favorite book, the one she suggested is Ensayo sobre la Figuera by José Saramago. And her favorite musical genre is salsa. The question, dream profession as a kid, she answered astronaut until she watched Artificial Intelligence from Steven Spielberg. She then changed her mind and wanted to build an artificial brain. So please welcome Laura.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Karim, for the invitation. So one of the parts that is missing here is actually my background is engineering. I'm a mechanical engineer, so I guess the interest in machines has always been there. And yeah, it was when I watched this movie that I said, like, okay, I think what I want to do is to build an artificial brain. So the title of my PhD project is Reverse Engineering the Connectome. This is my supervisor, Bratislav Misic. He's at McGill and he works at the Neuro. And I'm co-supervised by Guillaume Lajoie, who's there. He's at Université Montréal and Nila. And this is the amazing group of people I work with. So what I work is specifically, or my PhD research revolves around the link between structure and function in brain networks. So, you know, like we can model the brain as a network of functionally specialized brain regions that are physically connected with anatomical links. And we refer to this network of anatomical connections as the structural connectivity network of the brain. Now, that structural network forms the scaffold on which information propagates, and therefore it plays an important role in shaping how neural dynamics unfold over time. Now, these functionally specialized brain regions in the brain not only interact physically, but also functionally through coherent dynamics. And we capture those functional interactions via what we call functional connectivity networks. Now, the co-activation maps that emerge from those functional interactions are thought to be the neural correlates that support human cognition and behavior. But how these three elements, structure, dynamics, and function, interact to support the computations that underlie cognitive function and behavior is still one of the biggest questions in neuroscience, and my PhD tries to give an answer to that question. Now, the way we do this, I apologize because the slides changed a bit, but the way we do this is we combine MRI connectomics and computing framework known as reservoir computing to investigate the link between macroscale connectivity and the computational properties that emerge from network dynamics in the human connectome. So by MRI connectomics, we refer to this process of reconstructing the human connectome using MRI data. And then reservoir computing is, in a very broad sense for me, or the way I see it, is this idea of making computations using dynamical systems. Now, the advantage of reservoir computing, which is the reservoir is a recurrent neural network. So compared to traditional recurrent neural networks, the reservoir has the connections fixed. The only connections that you train are the connections that go from the reservoir to a linear read, to the readout module, which is typically a linear model. So that gives us the advantage that we can replace the architecture of this recurrent neural network using biological connectomes, and then we can using these connectome-informed reservoirs, we can perform different cognitive tasks that span multiple cognitive domains. And in this way, we can create like an ontology of structure-function relationships for different computational properties. So that's basically my research. So as an engineer, before coming to McGill and before studying neuroscience, I was working with a group of material scientists. They were developing artificial neural networks, but in hardware. These are known as membristic networks. Membristors have, it's a material that has the properties that it behaves like synapses in the brain, in the sense that the electrical properties of these membristors depend on the amount and the direction of the current that travels through them. So we can use these membristors are like ideal candidates to replace synapses in artificial neural networks on a hardware. So the idea is that if we know these structure-function relationships in biological networks, we could use these as guiding principles for the design of these neuromorphic chips. So yeah.
Thanks, Laura. So with this, now we'll open the conversation and we'll start with a few questions. And again, I encourage the audience to think about any questions you might have about the future of the intersection between neuroscience and AI, opportunities, but also challenges. And so Flavie and I will be co-chairing the session and we'll be asking a couple of questions. I will probably start with one very quick one, just to get the discussion going. And we don't need all of you necessarily to answer each one of those questions, but if it's a question that you feel interested, you want to say something, just go ahead. So the first one is going to be what is it in what you've seen in the recent times, or what you think is coming soon that you're most excited about for your research currently, and you think it could become a game changer in coming years? Is there something that you're particularly excited about and you want to share with us?
Does this mic work?
The microphone should work, yes.
Testing.
Okay. Yeah, so I think the advent of like the recurrent neural networks and how many different architectures that are being implemented, those are what are like very exciting, because I think it's not that the architectures that are like, they're not novel, because like we've been thinking about this idea of recurrence for a really long time and the ideas of top down. But I think the flexibility that those kinds of architectures are giving us would enable us to implement just so many different functions, and then we can, try to implement those really complicated connectivities that are happening inside of the brain, and that would probably enable a lot of different behaviors that we've not been able to implement before using the classical deep learning. I say classical, just like a couple of years ago.
So for me, I'm very excited about, well, still back to causality. Very excited about causal representation learning. So there's a lot of amazing people at Miller, and then also in Prof. Benjo's group where I work on causal discovery. That's looking at causal representation learning. So how do you learn some representational latent factors from high dimensional data like images and language? I don't think it's something that would be mainstream very soon, but I feel like in my mind, I call it machine learning 2.0, because I feel like in the next couple of years, probably next 30 years or so, when a lot of maybe packages and systems have been put in place, then it would really get to see the advantage and importance of it. Just the way deep learning and AI had the AI winter back then, when there were a lot of reasons for that, like the chips that didn't have a lot of computing power, and then recently, some year 2014 with the AlexNet, when the power of using deep learning for recognition really sparked the AI boom that we're having now. So I really see some hope in trying to infuse some causal representation power in machine learning models. This would help them really understand the data and not just using the correlation patterns in data, which could really help solve some of the problems that we have in the medical field, in the neuroscience field, and in different fields of life.
Great.
So I think we're often within the neurosciences really fascinated and drawn to the tools that are being developed. And I think that's really important. And my work definitely benefits from a lot of the tools that are being built. There are also really deep insights from people that are trying to solve the hard problems of actually building systems that do the things that we consider to be intelligence. There are some insights that emerge that I think are really useful for us to pay attention to if we're trying to study biological intelligence. For example, we have a lot of intuitions that we bring to our study of the brain and the mind. And we have been really fascinated for a long time with like logic and compositionality, et cetera. And I think these are really useful, interesting constructs that we've generated in order to understand the brain and intelligence and whatever. But it's interesting to note that we were able to beat the world's best chess player decades before we could see like a 2-year-old. We were able to beat the world's best Go player before we can walk like a 5-year-old. And so there's this general thing, which y'all are probably familiar with, Moravec's paradox, that some of the things that we think should be easy for computational models are actually really challenging. The things that we think for us should be really challenging are actually pretty straightforward, right? And that forces us to reevaluate the kinds of systems, the kinds of objectives, the kinds of behaviors that we're really interested in studying if we want to understand the mind or the brain. Similarly, a lot of psychologists, a lot of neuroscientists are kind of bitter, and I use that word intentionally, around the utility of data. The bitter lesson, right? A lot of neuroscientists are a little bit sad because the models that are doing the best are actually kind of moving away from the biologically inspired architectures, for example, convolutional neural networks. A lot of the field is moving towards like simple algorithms, simple learning rules, and a ton of data for better and for worse, right? And that is, of course, from an engineering perspective, if you want to build biologically plausible computational models, a little bit sad. But from the perspective of what are the insights that you gain, well, there's something really useful about thinking about intelligence as a function of the data. And within the neuroscience and psychology, we don't tend to think in that manner. And I think that will be a really useful way for us to kind of approach these questions moving forward.
Great. Maybe we can move to the next question. So it's possible to do neuroscience without doing AI and AI without doing neuroscience. But in your opinion, do you think there are some fields where progress will be possible only if we combine neuro and AI? And which fields are those?
I think at this point, almost every aspect that we would like to understand about the brain would benefit from AI, like these machine learning and AI, artificial intelligence models that we use as data analysis tools. I think they came to stay. So at this point, I think saying that we're going, as neuroscientists, we're going to do it without the help of these algorithms, I think it's kind of impossible at this point.
I might just add to that. So I mean, coming from engineering, I'm not an engineer, but I have been a lot of among them. So I mean, usually the engineers have a tendency to look at the data as a matrix full of numbers without kind of thinking so much about the cognitive aspects that might be involved with it, and especially when you work with the data coming from animals or humans, that you have to definitely take into account the sociological aspects or psychological aspects that, or cognitive aspects that involves with those interactions, or what the data actually means. Therefore, and given that actually in Patrick's talk that we all seen on the main educational, so how actually AI builds come from the in time, the investigating those interactions between the neurons. And so it relies on actually the biological systems itself. So therefore, I guess we can't consider AI separate from the those important human or animal or social or cognitive aspects itself, I believe.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And now I very much think that AI is more enriched when you have other fields coming into it, because it's because of problems in the medical field that we're looking for ways to make machine learning models better. It's because of problems in different fields that make us try to advance the current algorithms or find better algorithms. So if we didn't have these different fields kind of giving feedback, trying to use these AI models and giving feedback, we wouldn't really be trying to improve AI and what we're doing with AI. So I think AI as a field really needs these other fields like finance, medical domain, language, agriculture. And that's what really pushes the boundaries of AI. That's what really makes AI transform humanity, is when it's being used by these other fields. And by being used, we then get to see the challenges or some of the bottlenecks and things that need improving.
Yeah, so sorry. Yeah, so from the side of neuro, so now we're all we've sort of established that AI is being used by neuroscientists, even if they're doing experimental stuff. But the point is that if you don't really understand what is underlying those AI models, you are bound to, think of it as a magic tool that just gives you, magical stuff. So you need to understand what is actually beyond those models to make sure that, have a reality check on what you're actually discovering. Otherwise, you're gonna, hey, this works very well. And on the flip side, so the AI people are very obsessed with the performance metrics. So it's like, I want to make something that is much more accurate. And I like to get this, always use the example of visual reconstruction of images from brain data, because after it started happening, I've seen a lot of improvement in how the performance, and there's those really amazing reconstructions. And then I look at how the models are trained, is yeah, that does not generalize to brain data. It's if you just get an image that is outside of the distribution of what you trained the model on, it's gonna fail really badly. And as the smaller, actually a smaller training set that you use with those models and then use reconstruction, you're gonna get better results. So that's very counterintuitive. So getting this idea of knowing what the brain is actually doing, or trying to know what the brain is doing versus trying to achieve a better result. So this kind of interaction between the neuro and AI is very important in that condition.
I just want to add to that point, I've heard very often that AI researchers said that I don't think we need neuroscience to build intelligence. I agree. I mean, we can still build, AI researchers have shown that they don't need neuroscience to build intelligent machines. But I still feel that, what I often see in these new AI algorithms, they're great at outperforming human behavior in some cases, but still the amount of time and energy that these models spend is not even comparable to the brain. So I think that's where AI researchers will have to go back and see the brain, how it does it efficiently in terms of energy, and then maybe improve.
And philosophically speaking, they are using neuroscience because they're using their brains.
Great. So maybe next question is going to tap into the pace and the speed at which we're currently seeing advances, both in neuroscience and in AI, but in particular in AI, where every week there's a new model that comes up. So it's happening at a dazzling speed. And so the question is, as trainees in the field, is this actually an exciting time to be in the field because it's happening so fast? Or is it a frustrating time because by the time you get your model working, the next one is out and you said, well, damn, I want to switch to the next one. And you keep on struggling with this is way too fast. And so it's a source of frustration. So which one is it?
You guys test a lot of models.
Yeah. When I began the work that I've been doing for my PhD, there wasn't anything out there that was going to do really good three-dimensional object representations. If you all have, I'm sure that many of you know, NeRFs have emerged as a really simple model class that is able to do just absolutely mesmerizing things with 3D image reconstruction. And when I began the project, there was nothing that I could have used, there were no tools that I could have stolen from the field. And now there's this huge, just a burgeoning of different methods. And for me, that's a really exciting spot to be, because it means that I get to kind of piggyback on some of the progress that's been made. I think the challenge is figuring out how to make sure, as a neuroscientist, how is it that I'm kind of piggybacking, but not getting taken along for a ride that I really don't want to be on. There are a lot of things about NERFs that are wonderful, and there are a lot of things about NERFs that I don't think you should even pretend would be biologically plausible. And if what I want to do is understand the biology, I need to think very clearly. I need to be very sober about the utility of these models. For example, convnets are really useful for lots of things, and there's a ton of ways that you just shouldn't even begin to talk about them as being a correspondence to the underlying biology. Weight sharing is a really weird idea that is at the heart of convolution and is nothing like what we know the biological systems does. It's just literally not possible. And so I think being able to draw from the engineering insights while knowing the technical details well enough to not get confused about what they're solving and what they're not solving, I think that's where it's the most exciting. But it means that you have to also really keep pace with the technological developments, which of course is just time and energy. And hopefully you surround yourself with a community of people that can help teach you things as you're figuring it out for yourself.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I will bring in a different perspective, not as a scientist, but some of the communities I've interacted with. It's brought some fear about whether AI will take over their jobs. So when ChatGPT came out, one of the communities, someone posted ChatGPT giving a very wonderful code with Python, everything perfectly, and the person said, "Whoa, AI is taking over my data science job." And so, yeah, from the point of view of the practitioner, so those who are not scientists or researchers doing research, it brings this excitement as well as the fear, like it will take over the job. But I think we as researchers know that even with these exciting features, there are a lot of limitations. The companies don't try to really, shine so much light on the limitations, because that's how it's for the advertisement. But as researchers, we should always remember that these models or these wonderful things still have their limitations, and it's our job to work on these limitations. So this is where I see the as my view on the progress. Another thing I'm really excited about is, so there are really so much progress. Like you could wake up the next day and see like a new algorithm that's out there. And it's sometimes when we write papers, the reviewer says, "Oh, you didn't try this model and that model and that model. We need to see the results." And sometimes it's quite hectic. But I've realized that sometimes all these improvements and stuff are just like incremental improvements. So if you understand maybe the basic idea of PPO, then you could understand other improvements on it, and it's really quick. So sometimes I like to also go back to some of the original papers that started with the basic ideas of maybe the dropout mechanism or the convolution neural nets, and really reading them, because it gives you a really good foundation. And then you're not really trying to catch up with all these new papers. Oh, there's a new paper, I have to go read it now. You just really like, you could read the abstract and understand, okay, this is the main improvement, and maybe I need this now, I don't need this now. And it also helps you to really catch up with the progress that's going on.
I might maybe add to that. So it's not about the pace, I guess, because I'm sure, especially during the pandemic, that we have been immensely benefited having a lot of open data about COVID, and this has been put in the models, and we were able to predict what's going to come. We were good or bad, it's debatable, but so it's not the speed. So we are happy with those machines and tools are developed, but it's at the moment the speed is quite unprecedented. It's irregulated, so it's not audited, and causing a lot of we are traveling into a future that we don't know what's gonna be like, and because there is no rules and this consensus even across the countries about data protection, and and human beings, we all are actually, even some studies show that we are pretty relying on the decisions made by those machines rather than subjective decisions. For example, most of you might have heard that this mortgage crisis happening in Dutch countries. So many people have been put under a lot of debt because of some miscalculations of those AI models, or the recruitment systems in Amazon come under spotlight with the bias towards the woman. I mean, you can obviously increase this number of examples that we keep hearing every other day. So these are the ones that scares other than the technology, as Tyler was saying, developing, or the models keep developing. So I guess this is the most we should be thinking about.
Yeah, to add to that is also, yeah, it is very important, like, because of this really high speed, like there's a lot of people who just don't care about the implications of what those models are going to have. But I have to say, as someone who's looking into robustness in AI and neuroscience, it's really fun breaking those models. Just, like, hey, this new model, and they show like this really impressive results. And I'm like, yeah, let's try something that's let's see how it performs on real data. Because the thing is that a lot of those models, they're really trained with well-curated data sets. And then once you just take them to the real world, they just like data sets in the wild are just, like a wild dog versus a cute puppy.
And maybe like continuing in that direction, what do you think are the main challenges that the Neuro-AI community will face in the next few years?
And very briefly, I'm just going to ask people, if you have questions, you can go to the microphones, because after this question, we'll be taking questions from the audience and from Zoom. So feel free to join us in the conversation.
Or comments. I'd love to hear everybody.
Yeah, questions or comments.
The data. I think, so speaking broadly in AI, not specific to the neuroscience community, I think one major problem that we don't really talk much about is the data set, because as researchers, we're more into trying to build the algorithms and the mathematics and equations. But the data is really, really important, because if you have a very wonderful model and no data to train, you don't have a wonderful product. At the same time, you could have a very simple algorithm like diffusion and a very huge data set, and then you have stability diffusion that can do wonderful text to image generator. And so, and there's a lot of things, nuances around the data, like how the data set should be got, is it ethical, is it privacy? So it's like a whole new field there. And then so while we are working on the challenges in terms of the models and the modeling, I think the data side is something that we as researchers should really put more emphasis on, and also really supports efforts that create new data sets, because it's really hard to annotate data and it's really tasking. So we should support that more. That's what I think.
I think that from a modeling framework, the experiments that you need to separate competing models, those experiments and how you would design them are on a deep level fundamentally misaligned with the experiments that neuroscientists have traditionally been running. Traditionally, what neuroscientists have done is looked for increasing control, given the measuring limitations around given the limitations on the measurement devices that we use. A lot of what we do is we try to reduce the amount of noise, reduce the amount of variance to only happen along the hypothesized axes that we're trying to study, right? And this is one of the reasons why things like Gabors in V1 have captivated the neuroscientific community. This is one of the reasons why grid cells have captivated the neuroscientific community, because you can isolate a lot of the variance and find something which seems to be this beautiful biological firing pattern. Nice. But one of the things that we observed, right, with the Gabors, for example, is that Gabors are any model. If you just use Gabors as, okay, well, this is a thing that happens in the brain, so let's use it to find the best models. It's like, no, because any model of vision that you build is going to have Gabors emerge in the first few layers. And so this thing which we are captivated by from within the neuroscience community is actually not doing a very good job at separating competing models, because all the models are going to have this simple thing. Similarly, one of the things that we've observed in the like the hippocampal grid cell community is that it's very minimal constraints that you need in order to get the emergence of grid cells. We're captivated by grid cells, but grid cells don't do a very good job at separating competing models. So we're in this space where the things that you need from the machine learning perspective to find good models, and the things that you need from the neuroscientist perspective to identify interesting things are really misaligned. And there's gonna need to be a lot of work from trainees to convince the neuroscientific community that what kinds of experiments should we be running. This happens a lot with the work that I do. This happens a lot with trying to communicate with people who are working with primates, with humans, with rodents. How can we get experiments with more behavioral variation? Behavioral variation that would have been in previous decades just untenable because you couldn't have characterized it. But now with these contemporary tools, that's the kind of variation that you need to separate between good models and decent models, right? So I think this is scientifically, this is one of the main challenges that I see that I'm facing. It's also really exciting because it means that we're in a moment scientifically where there are these very different trends, and figuring out how to align these things is really fun, professionally daunting, but a really great opportunity to develop community collaborations, etc.
I'd like to add just another thing in the end, which is the efficiency of computation, because we keep trying to add more parameters and use more computing power to simulate the brain, while the brain is able to do those computations with very little power. So that's more of a technological constraint so far, and maybe the memristors would be an opportunity for that, or maybe other things as well. So that's one thing I'm looking forward to seeing.
I think another challenge from the scientific point of view related to what Tyler was saying is the lack of a common conceptual framework between the two fields. I think it would be nice that there was an effort from the neuroscience community and from the AI community that we could come up with a set of terms that would facilitate the dialogue between the two fields. And I was thinking about something else, which I forgot.
So I have a question for Mohamed. So I'm talking of the technological constraints. So are you suggesting that we should have more powerful computational power,
more efficient computational units, as in use of energy?
Oh,
so neurons, they don't use a lot of energy. So versus transistors.
So it's not about building bigger ones, but being more efficient ones.
Something that is as compact or as efficient as the brain.
I see. But, what I see, the trend is that, so for example, there's quantum computing, which is trying to also build quantum chips, and the hope is that it would be more efficient, but that's not really, so supported and facilitated. What's going on more is building bigger superclusters and computing powers that can build. So
yeah, because still quantum computing is not very reliable yet.
True.
So, but I think quantum computing is a very interesting endeavor. I would love to put my hands on a quantum machine and try to implement a neural network on it, because that's one thing that we can think of, neurons that we're not measuring. Yeah, as would be those superimposed quantum states. That would be super interesting.
Just to say one more thing, just an invitation to everybody, and just kind of following up on this idea that there's not a common language. There's a recent BBS article and submission that's looking for people to comment on. From Bowers is the senior author. It is a fantastic example of a lack of common language. It is just a deep and insightful misunderstanding of everything that the field is doing right now. It's this full-throated critique of things. When someone's on some Twitter thread is buckle up, we're in for a ride. And you're I didn't need a windshield for that. We didn't get out of the parking lot. This is really what the thing is it brings up a ton of things that are huge issues with deep learning. And it's bro, every single one of these points is very well understood within the community. It's what we're actively working to resolve. And yet somebody gets points for dunking on a bunch of researchers, mostly a bunch of junior researchers who are trying to do work to move the field forward. And so this is a great example of, it's an invitation because every one of you can submit until I think the 25th of December, every one of you can submit a commentary to this article, which is in review right now in BBS. Again, senior authors Bowers. It would be fantastic to have more people responding to it and really kind of taking it apart piece by piece. Sorry.
Okay, so I think the invitation is well received. We are a little bit, not a little bit, we're actually really late on our schedule, but this is just so much fun. So maybe we'll have 2 or 3 more minutes if you have any questions from the audience, to our panelists, or if there's maybe one from Zoom, but we don't have, unfortunately, more time than that because we want to make sure that you all get time to eat. And also today we have also the posters. There's going to be evaluation of posters and so on. So if somebody has a question, please come up to the microphone. Is there a question on Zoom? There's one question on Zoom. I'll give you the mic. Sure.
So there's this question from Jose Fernandez. AI simulations are like equations, and the mathematics of the real brain does not deal with hidden variables and, in a biological realm. What can we learn from AI to actually help understand the brain's hidden aspects?
I mean, so one of the things, I think this is a fantastic question. Often the way that neuroscientists and cognitive scientists and psychologists approach this question is to build model, going back to, for example, look at the old connectionist models like the Rumelhart and McClellan models. They're really beautiful, they're elegant, and they're completely unrelated to anything that the brain is doing on a fundamental level. Why is that? Well, really, if you take like, a 10-dimensional one-hot vector and pass it into a model and try to learn something about cognition, like the input space is fundamentally misaligned. The input space the model is confronted with, the representational challenge the model has to solve is fundamentally misaligned with the representational challenge that we as animals have to solve. And that is not, for example, figuring out where to go on a chessboard, given the chessboard is in the right format. The challenge there is figuring out, given the wild and wacky sensory data streams that we receive, how do we learn tasks? How do we figure out, how do we infer what goals are from raw sensory data streams? We're not given hand-tuned objective functions when we enter into the world. We're not given the, win at chess objective, right? We learn to infer it, and we do that from sensory data streams. So I think one of the ways that neuroscientists, one of the ways that AI has the most promising ways, I think, is it enables us to confront the representational challenges that animals are confronted with, including ourselves, to confront those representational challenges and try to figure out how we generate behavior given those sensory data streams, 1, and 2, given the sample complexity that we are offered in our lives. And so those 2 things I think are really going to be essential, especially formatting the problem appropriately from raw sensory data streams.
Thank you so much. This was fascinating and exciting and inspiring discussion. Please join me in thanking our panelists for this very nice discussion.